This is Worldview, and thank you for joining us live from our studio in Johannesburg. I'm Yvonne Katsande. Today we take a look at what happened in Kenya. In the country's deadliest attack since 1998, 148 students and staff were killed on the campus of Garissa University College last Thursday. Now, the country's interior ministry say that one of the 4 gunmen was the son of a Kenyan government official whose father had reported him missing in 2014. Many Kenyans had believed that security improved enough since Al-Shabaab held Nairobi's Westgate Mall under siege for 4 days in September of 2013, resulting in the deaths of 67 people. Had it not, the massacre at Garissa University College would have been far worse, some say, but only 2 police officers were on duty. But the number of people killed in the attack is plaguing Kenyans with self-doubt. With the highest death toll since the 1998 Al-Qaeda bombing on the United States Embassy in Nairobi, many are saying security is still not tight enough. And days after the attack, authorities revealed that rapid response forces arrived hours later, allowing the killings to drag on. In light of these heightened attacks, President Uhuru Kenyatta has vowed to build a barrier wall dubbed the Great Wall of Kenya, all in a bid to protect his people. Earlier, the United Kingdom included Garissa in recent warning of an imminent attack. And last month, the United States Embassy warned of possible attacks throughout Kenya in the near term after the reported death of a key Al-Shabaab leader, Aden Garar, who was accused in the Westgate attack. Some Kenyans are now asking why security forces did not react to those warnings in advance by putting security in place. And joining me tonight via Skype call is Brooks Spector, a political analyst and an online publisher with the Daily Maverick here in South Africa. Brooks, good evening and thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Good to be with you again.
Now, we're talking about a rather disturbing incident that happened last week on Thursday. The world's still reeling of what happened and what could have caused this. Now, why is Al-Shabaab targeting Kenya?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. And first, we need to make it absolutely clear that what took place was truly horrifying. If you'd seen the photographs of the aftermath, it was extraordinary. The victims lying on the floor of a university building, pretty much as they fell, just dozens and dozens in a particular room. It's both graphic and disturbing in very strong kinds of ways. But let's go back in history a little bit. Somalia hasn't really had an effective government for decades. There have been any number of different versions of insurrections and irregular fighters and terror groups and insurgencies scattered through most of the country for many years. The problem for Kenya in particular is multifaceted. Part of it simply is that the ethnicity, the Somali ethnicity, as many of your viewers undoubtedly know, is not simply limited to Somalia. There are kindred Somalis in the northeastern part of Kenya where this particular university college is located. And there have been historical grievances about the low level of development and the disproportionate lack of government services and resources going to that area, on top of the potential for divided loyalties between Kenya and the closer ethnicity of the Somali ethnicity. But Kenya has also maintained over the years a fairly tight embrace and an informal alliance of sorts with the United States in the larger global struggle against this kind of fundamentalist insurgency, which is only too prevalent in Somalia itself. There have been a number of incursions by Kenya, both unilaterally and in collaboration with other multilateral forces into Somalia. And so as a result, when you put all these things together, there's certainly ripe ground for activities from Somalia directed against targets in Kenya, especially if al-Shabaab and other groups are increasingly being pressed by world activities. To the extent that you have an attack on an isolated university campus like this, the individuals who carried it out were clearly well-trained and well-disciplined, but from the perspective of the organizing group, it's a fairly low-cost enterprise to send a mere handful of fighters with their weapons against what is, after all, a soft target. That doesn't require vast logistical chains of support. It doesn't require enormous numbers of individuals. It doesn't require vast resources financially to carry it off. And that's the quote unquote beauty of the thing as well as its horror. And the results, of course, are what we saw.
Okay, but what is the Kenyan government doing about this? We have seen the Nairobi American Embassy being attacked. We've also seen the Westgate Mall siege, and now, just recently, Garissa University. Who knows what to expect next? What is the Kenyan government doing about this?
Well, the problem for Kenya is not unique to Kenya, of course. The world, if you look at any society, any country, the world is filled with what we would call soft targets. You cannot protect every government building, every educational facility, every hospital, every place of business, every shopping area.
But this was after, let me just highlight that this was after a warning of an imminent attack.
24 hours. No, you're quite right. And the problem then is not only can't you protect everything, that it is also that some people take the warnings that do come in from intelligence sources and underplay the severity of the possibility. But it's not limited to Kenya. You remember in France some months back with the attack on the satirical magazine, it was clear that the French admitted that there was no way they could both protect every institution and monitor every person that they already had suspicions about and deal with everything in advance of any possible attack. The problem, the way the world is set up, it's very hard for security forces to do that because you can't have everybody under security circumstances all the time. Even in a society like Russia, which presumably has a much tighter grip on the movement of people than in a place like Kenya, you still have attacks. If you remember in Moscow some years back, there was an attack by a group of Chechen fighters on a movie theater in which hundreds of people ultimately were wounded or killed. So it really is, it's a problem, but you're right. When you boil it all down, the Kenyan government should have been more aware of something happening, but then the problem devolves to where do you pay attention first? Where do you protect first or most strongly? The fact that there were only 2 or 3 people on duty at the Garissa University College, now that's a mistake. The fact that it took 7 hours for the Kenyan Special Security Forces to arrive, and it took hours more before the attack was finally quelled as the numbers of victims began to rise. All of those things are very troubling for anybody who looks at it from the outside.
Yes, that was actually going to lead me to my next question as to why they took so much time to actually get to the scene. However, you have actually answered that. But what I find rather disturbing is that one of the attackers happened to be the son of one of the political officials. Would we say that some of those political officials in Kenyans, or perhaps just Kenyans in general, are actually sponsoring the al-Shabaab?
Well, no, I think that's a bridge too far. The individual concerned apparently had lost touch with his family some time before that, and it is also true that historically, people who are better off, people who have more access to family resources, who are better educated, perhaps even more traveled, Some of those people sometimes make the choice to join in rebel groups or fighters against the society they live in for any number of different reasons, whether they're psychological, sociological, or political. Historically, that's always been true. But it does mean that when somebody like that vanishes off the radar for a family, when it's a prominent family and the child of a highly placed official, people need to pay more attention to such things. If you remember the newspaper headlines, the news, there were numbers of the children of British families and others, Belgium and France and various other countries have been trying to get to IS facilities, or facilities, the wrong word, IS fighter groups in northern Iraq and northern Syria over the last number of months. And there was one individual who almost left South Africa, a young woman, age of 15, who almost left to go to an IS group for very much the same kind of reasons. No one would say that most of those people were from families without resources, who were deeply impoverished, who were ground down by oppression. These were people who came to that feeling through very different channels, through the, shall we say, the seduction of the internet, the seduction of appeals to them by friends. And it's a real problem for all of us around the world that such things will happen. It's not unique, unfortunately, to Kenya, even though, as you say, it was the child of a highly placed Kenyan official. It just says that such things will happen. And historically, if you look back over groups in the early 1900s, this was also true. And many of the people who joined the Russian Revolution as their leaders back in the early 1900s came from better off families who were better educated than the rest of their compatriots. Psychologically, people are drawn to these things by virtue of their better appreciation of the injustices of the world, shall we say, and they find that this is the way they decide they must begin to address it on a personal level. How you stop that is, well, it's just really, really hard to say how one stops that.
All right. Now, having said that, Brooks, some have questioned why the call of guns being banned in Kenya after several attacks has not been so loud as we have seen in the United States. Or is that only reserved for Americans, if I may say?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase your question? I didn't quite get the very beginning part. Sorry.
The call to ban guns in Kenya after such several attacks of a similar nature that are terrorist attacks. We also have seen terrorist attacks happening in other parts of the world, for example, the United States and many others. But then the call for banning the guns in those particular areas has been so loud as to what we are seeing happening in Kenya. Why is that? Do you think that the call for banning guns is a necessity rather?
Banning firearms in whole or in part has other social goods that come to it. There's less violence within families. There's less violence, deadly force violence, when there is a crime, an ordinary crime being carried out. If you can actually control, register, and limit the availability of firearms. But that, of course, always leaves the question of people who are going to carry out a terribly illegal act will probably find some way to get a hold of a firearm as a weapon. In any case, the weapons in Kenya probably didn't come from within Kenya itself anyway. They were probably carried over the borders, such as it is, from Somalia into the Somali ethnic area of Kenya, and then the individuals who carried out the attack did their staging in that area. If you look at a map and you look where Garissa is, it's quite clear that it's far away from the major centers of population in Kenya, the area around Nairobi or the area around Mombasa, where much of the Kenyan population, in fact, lives. The firearms issue is not, strictly speaking, an issue on the terror agenda as much as it is an issue on the criminal problems in all societies, or the violence even within families and among neighbors.
Okay, so how has the United States responded to the Garissa attacks?
Well, I mean, at this point, there's been no request, to the best of my knowledge, for U.S. forces, boots on the ground, as they say, because the Kenyans feel that they understand their environment and they understand how to manage their military and security forces. What probably is happening is the kind of thing that was already in motion to some degree, and that's going to be intelligence sharing, intercepts from communication, intercepts from the internet, and intercepts on the basis of information that's conveyed by one or another. If you look, for example, out at sea off the coast of Somalia, a broad international coalition of, I think it's 17 or 18 nations in toto, are cooperating to maintain the sea lane from pirate attacks and hijacking efforts that has increasingly become successful. Much of that is, in fact, carried out because of an intense intelligence information sharing that at its heart draws on the technological capabilities to monitor the communications between would-be hijackers on the sea. I think you're going to see a lot more coordination and cooperation on intelligence information gathering. I don't want to use we're not talking about James Bond style intelligence. We're talking about the technological capability to gather communications from cell phones, from landlines, via the internet, and to gather it together and process it in real enough time.
Can we say that Africa is currently involved in a religious war? It seems like these terror attacks are on the increase in different parts of Africa. And just recently, South Africa has also been on a red alert.
I don't like to characterize these things as religious wars. I think that oversimplifies the problem. I think what you have are insurrections in various countries based on grievances, both real and imagined. You have historical conflicts between different ethnicities, much of which, but not always, fall across the fault line between religious observances. But religion isn't always the trigger point. Case in point, Mali in West Africa. Most of the people in Mali, of course, are Muslim and have been for centuries. But there is an intense ethnic difference between those people in the north and those people closer to the Niger River. In the southern portion, the southern half of the country, the ethnicity is different. The sense of grievance about whether or not resources are equitably or reasonably fairly used has been a long-standing problem, and other groups outside of Mali have made use of that to challenge the government and to make it more difficult for governance. The problem in Kenya, of course, had a religious texture to it. It is clear, but some number, I don't know the precise number, some number of the nearly 150 victims were Muslim, even if a significant portion of them were Christian. In the Central African Republic, of course, there's been a different dynamic. The attackers have, to a considerable degree, been Christian against mosques and people of the Islamic faith. It's one of those fault lines that lies across ethnic fault lines, lies across economic issues, lies across political grievances. Sometimes the religious line is the same. Sometimes it binds people together. Sometimes it drives them apart. Nigeria, of course, as your viewers will know intimately, in the northern half of the country. Most of the people are Muslim. Not all of them, certainly. Perhaps only a tiny minority of such people are supportive of the activities of Boko Haram. But it's not a war in Nigeria of Christians or Islamists, for that matter, against Muslims in just the same way as it is not a war by Muslims against Christians. It's an effort in a portion of Nigeria that is already largely Muslim to carry out a political agenda and to carry it out under the guise of religion. I think if you were to get all the Nigerians who were Islamic, who professed Islam, together, and you asked them how many of you support Boko Haram, you'd have very few hands up in the air. But if you were to ask them how many of you think that the government over the years has unfairly provided more money, more support, more interest in the southern half of the country, probably a good chunk of those hands would go up for a whole range of historical reasons.
Now, a manhunt is underway for the terrorist who masterminded the murder of the students at Garissa University. The country's most wanted man has been identified as Mohammed Mohamud, a former teacher, and a £145,000 bounty on his head for orchestrating the massacre at the university. Have there been any leads so far? Any latest news of his whereabouts?
That unfortunately is a question I don't know the answer to. But bounties or rewards can only be part of a strategy. They by themselves will not solve the problem.
It was in the morning, many of us were asleep. Then we heard someone screaming, which woke many of us up, like in the ladies' hostels, first years. So many of us ran for rescue, the field, and we jumped over fences. But then there are others who the alshabaab people had already secured their gates, like the first year boys, so they're not able to come out of the school. So they hid in their rooms. So after that, when they went to look for them in their rooms, the ones that they found hiding in the same under the bed or in the closets, they were shot there and then. Others were asked to surrender. Those who were asked to surrender were asked to go out. If you know, they ask you if you know Quran, and then if you don't know, they shoot you. If you know, they let you go. Like there's one boy, the only boy who knew, then he was sold.
A manhunt is underway for the terrorist who masterminded the killings at Garissa University. The country's most wanted man has been identified as Mohammed Mohamud, a former teacher who has a £145,000 bounty on his head for orchestrating and masterminding this terrible attacks. Has there been any leads of his whereabouts? Any latest news?
Well, I'm sorry, I actually don't know the answer to that. But let me just speak to the larger question of the use of rewards or bounties on people who are being sought for one or another of these kinds of crimes. The bounty by itself is helpful, but is not always necessary and sufficient. It can only work well within the context of having lots more information that has been collected and gathered, most especially communications data. But within any of these insurrectionist or insurgent or terror type cells, although there usually is intense loyalty to the leader, sometimes the enticement, the seductions of a bounty is sufficient for a split to emerge, to turn somebody over, to provide the vital hint. But it can only be part of a much larger strategy of trying to track down, to capture, and to put an end to the operations of a group like that. Because undoubtedly it's not a group in which there are hundreds of people working together with all the data and all the information among themselves. This will be small cells, small groups of people trying to do things. As we've talked already, it was certainly less than a half dozen people involved in this particular attack.
Okay, now, lastly, before we actually close the show, we did speak about South Africa being put on the red alert, especially after having received such disturbing attacks around Africa and perhaps the world at large. Would you say that South Africa is turning a blind eye on terrorism?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that that the South African government is acutely aware of the question of terror attacks in the abstract, but that perhaps for a number of years, they saw it as something that took place beyond their borders rather than within them. I think at this point, although there aren't terror attacks in South Africa, there's a growing awareness by South African government and security officials that the possibility of South Africans being enticed into participating in attacks, perhaps somewhere else, as we understood to be the case with the shopping mall in Kenya just a while ago. One person presumably came from this country and was presumably part of it, and the fact that a young woman was apparently lured from Cape Town through Johannesburg and on her way to the Middle East to join up with IS, the Islamic State. So I would say that the government's coming to the realization that a more active participation in paying attention to these possibilities is actually coming. There is always, of course, a counter argument that once you start down that path, it is very easy to slide into what people tend to refer to as a security state. And that means, of course, everybody being checked for all kinds of things in all kinds of ways. And that's not how most people want to live. They don't like to live in a society where everywhere you go, your bona fides, your identification is checked and evaluated. It's a very awkward and unpleasant kind of life to have to live. And I think most societies in the world rightly reject that as an idea. But there has to be a balance somewhere between that very severe version and the ability to keep track of people who really wish to do others harm. And that's something that every government and every society has to find that balance that is enough but still somewhat comfortable.
Well, thank you so much, Brooks, for your time and your analysis there. That was Brooks Spector joining us there for an analysis on what happened with the Kenya-Garissa attacks. Thank you very much. And now for us on the program, until we meet again next week as we bring you more insight on the world's political and current affairs, I'm Yvonne Katsande, and good evening.